I'm sorry, Kwame whispered, his voice barely audible. If you need food, you can take more. No one will stop you. But the boy shook his head, pride flaring in his expression despite his ragged clothes. I'm not a beggar. I don't take handouts. Everything I have, I've earned, even if I had to steal it. That's work too, harder than you'd ever know. With that, the boy turned and scaled the fence, disappearing behind the wall, leaving Kwame standing there, shaken and deeply moved. The morning sun was barely visible, shrouded by a thick veil of grey clouds that cast a somber mood over the palace courtyard. The air was heavy with the scent of rain, and a chilling breeze swept through the ancient stone walls, making the banners of the kingdom flutter lifelessly. The palace guards moved with quiet efficiency, their faces grim as they prepared the grand carriages for King Adebayo's journey. The sound of horses' hooves on the cobblestones echoed through the courtyard, a reminder that time was slipping away, pulling the two lovers closer to an inevitable farewell. In a quiet corner of the courtyard, away from the bustle, King Adebayo and Kwame clung to each other as if the strength of their embrace could defy the forces threatening to tear them apart. Their bodies trembled, not from the cold, but from the overwhelming fear of not knowing what the future held for them. The world around them seemed to fade, leaving only the desperate beating of their hearts, locked in an agonizing rhythm that mirrored their shared anguish. Adebayo's hands gripped Kwame's back tightly, his regal composure crumbling in the face of their impending separation. He buried his face in Kwame's shoulder, inhaling the familiar scent that had become his anchor in the turbulent sea of his life. "I don't want to leave you," Adebayo whispered, his voice raw with emotion. Kwame pulled back slightly, just enough to cup Adebayo's face in his hands, forcing the king to meet his gaze. His eyes, usually filled with warmth and light, were now clouded with concern, yet there was an undeniable resolve in them. "Adebayo, listen to me," Kwame said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever happens at the union, whatever decision you make, I will not be mad at you. I love you with every part of me, and nothing in this world can change that. I can go back to Ghana if you need me to. I can stay away, remain hidden, so that neither you nor this kingdom has to suffer because of me. I don't mind being your secret, Ade." "Stop saying that, Kwame," King Adebayo said, his voice cracking with desperation and frustration. Kwame had been hinting at this for days, and the mere thought of him leaving to make things easier for Adebayo terrified him. The idea of waking up one day and not finding Kwame by his side was unbearable. "We are married now. You are not going anywhere. Do you understand me, Kwame? I'd rather not return to find you gone. I can't leave without you." His hands gripped Kwame's face, his gaze locking with his husband's, trying to convey the gravity of his words and the depth of his need. Kwame nodded, tears welling up in his eyes as he saw the raw pain etched on Adebayo's face. The thought of leaving, even for the sake of easing Adebayo's burdens, was past bearable, despite his hints at it. Adebayo pulled Kwame into a desperate, crushing hug. It was a hold that spoke of fear and yearning, a silent plea for time to stop, for the world to hold its breath. He enveloped Kwame in his embrace, pressing his body against his, as if trying to merge them into one, to remind Kwame of every promise ever made between them. A flashback seized Adebayo as he recalled their wedding day only a few days ago, when the messenger had brought the letter summoning him to the Union of West African Kings. The joyous celebration had been overshadowed by the ominous arrival of that sealed missive. Since then, a tension had settled between them, a quiet but thick strain that neither could ignore. Adebayo had spent many moments lost in thought, wrestling with the weight of what was to come. Kwame had noticed, of course. He always did. In those moments, Kwame had found himself wondering if Adebayo regretted marrying him, if the king was beginning to see the burdens their love had placed upon his shoulders. They had spoken about the summon, but Adebayo had remained tight-lipped about his intentions. He had answered every question Kwame asked with patience, but when it came to what he planned to say to the other kings when he presented himself before them, whether he would recant their marriage or the legalization of same-sex marriage act he had passed, Adebayo had remained silent, leaving Kwame to grapple with the unknown. Now, as they stood on the brink of separation, Kwame's mind swirled with these thoughts, yet his love for Adebayo remained strong. He pressed a desperate kiss to Adebayo's lips, a kiss filled with all the words he couldn't say, all the fears he couldn't voice, and all the love he hoped would sustain them through the trials ahead. When they finally parted, it felt like a piece of Kwame's soul was being torn away. Adebayo lingered for a moment, his forehead resting against Kwame's, their breaths mingling in the cold morning air. "Everything will be okay," Adebayo murmured, though he wasn't sure if he was making a vow or pleading with the universe. With one final kiss, this time placed tenderly on Kwame's forehead, Adebayo turned away and stepped into the awaiting carriage. The doors closed behind him with a resonating thud, sealing him off from the one person who made him feel whole. Kwame stood helplessly, his eyes fixed on the carriage as it slowly began to move away. His heart ached with a longing so intense it felt almost suffocating. He watched until the carriage disappeared around the corner, and with a heavy heart he turned away. He wandered the palace grounds aimlessly, his mind swirled with worry. Why couldn't they just be happy? He murmured to himself. Why must the world always come between them? He wandered the palace grounds for a while, and as he turned a corner into an unfamiliar part of the palace, one of many he had never explored in its vastness, something unusual caught his eye. A boy, no older than 16, was climbing over the palace fence, slipping into the compound with the stealth of someone who had done this many times before. The boy's clothes were tattered and dirty, his face set in determination as he glanced around like a thief. Intrigued, Kwame followed the boy, keeping a careful distance. The boy sneaked into the palace kitchen, swiftly stuffing food into a worn bag. He moved with practiced efficiency, raiding the pantry and even grabbing a few items from the medicine cabinet before making his way back to the wall. Just as the boy was about to climb back over the fence, Kwame stepped out from the shadows and grabbed him. The boy struggled fiercely, his fear evident as he tried to break free. "Why are you stealing?" Kwame asked, his voice filled with both curiosity and concern. The boy glared at him, defiance flickering in his eyes like a dying flame. His lips remained stubbornly sealed, clutching the stolen items as if they were his last lifeline. But Kwame didn't back down. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said gently. "Just tell me, why are you doing this?" The boy suddenly laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed off the palace walls. "You're so out of touch with reality that you're asking me why I'm stealing." His voice trembled with a mix of frustration and anger. "Look at me, look at my clothes. Why do you think I'm stealing? Why do you think anyone steals? It's not because I want to. It's because I have to." His eyes were dark and accusing, filled with a pain far beyond his years. "But you wouldn't understand that, staying up here in the sky with your rich husband, surrounded by everything you need." The words hit Kwame like a blow to the chest, each syllable loaded with truth and sorrow. The boy's eyes, filled with a haunting mix of youth and age, made Kwame's heart ache with guilt. He let go of the boy, feeling the weight of his own privilege in a way he hadn't before. "I'm sorry," Kwame whispered, his voice barely audible. If you need food, you can take more. No one will stop you." But the boy shook his head, pride flaring in his expression despite his ragged clothes. "I'm not a beggar. I don't take handouts. Everything I have, I've earned, even if I had to steal it. That's work too, harder than you'd ever know." With that, the boy turned and scaled the fence, disappearing behind the wall, leaving Kwame standing there, shaken and deeply moved. Determined to understand more, Kwame followed the boy out of the palace, pulling his wrap to cover his face so as not to be recognized. The boy led him down winding streets, away from the grandeur of the palace, and into an old, worn part of the kingdom. The buildings here were dilapidated, their once bright colors faded, and the air was thick with the scent of poverty and neglect. He made a mental note to tell Adebayo to do something about the state of this place. Kwame followed the boy into an abandoned house, his heart breaking at the sight before him. A little girl who looked to be around 10 or 11 lay frail and sick on a tattered mattress. The boy rushed to her side, dropping the bag of stolen goods as he knelt beside her. "Look, I found food and medicine," he whispered, his voice trembling with hope. He shook her gently, desperation seeping into his words. "Please wake up," he begged, tears welling up in his eyes. But the girl remained still, and the boy's pleas grew more frantic, his small frame shaking with fear and grief. Kwame watched in silence, his heart aching for the boy who was far too young to bear such burdens. Just as he was about to step forward to offer comfort, the back door creaked open. Both Kwame and the boy looked up to see a tall, mean-looking man enter the room. The man's face twisted with anger as he stormed over to the boy, grabbing him roughly by the collar. "Where's my money?" the man demanded, his voice cold and menacing. The boy trembled in the man's grip, his eyes wide with terror. He pointed weakly at his sister on the mattress, trying to explain, but the man's gaze only hardened. "I don't care about your sister," the man spat, throwing the boy to the ground. "I want my money. You'd better have it by the end of the day, or else." As the man stormed out, the boy crumpled beside his sister, his body shaking with silent sobs. Kwame's heart ached with sympathy, and without thinking, he stepped out of the shadows. Startled, the boy jumped to his feet and pulled out a small knife, pointing it at Kwame with a mixture of fear and determination. "Why are you following me?" he demanded, his voice unsteady. Kwame raised his hands in a gesture of peace, his eyes soft and reassuring. "I want to help," he said gently, glancing at the sick girl. "She needs a physician immediately." The boy's grip on the knife tightened, his distrust evident. "What do you want in return?" Kwame knelt beside the girl, checking her pulse. "I have no ulterior motive," he assured the boy, signaling to the palace guards who trailed him silently. "She can come back to the palace with me. I'll make sure she gets the care she needs." The boy watched in wary silence, his distrust deepening. When Kwame invited him to come to the palace as well, the boy scoffed. "Men like you don't help for no reason. Tell me what you want in return." Kwame was taken aback but understood the boy's pain. "I don't want anything from you," he repeated quietly. "I just want to help." The boy's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "If you're helping my sister because you want me to do weird favors for you, I won't do it. I'm not that kind of street kid." Kwame's heart broke at the boy's words, at the deep mistrust shaped by a life of hardship. "You don't have to trust me," Kwame said gently, "but your sister needs help. Let me do this for her." The boy stood in silence, weighing Kwame's words. Finally he nodded, though his eyes remained guarded. "Fine, but don't think I owe you anything." As the guards carried the girl out, Kwame turned to the boy. "What's your name?" he asked softly, hoping to ease the tension. The boy hesitated before answering, his voice low and guarded. W. Kwame raised an eyebrow, a small gentle smile forming. Nobody's name is just one letter. What's your real name? The boy's eyes flashed with stubbornness. My name is W and my sister's name is A. Kwame studied him for a moment, sensing there was more to the story. But he decided to respect the boy's choice. All right, W, he said softly, nodding. Let's get A the help she needs. Later that evening, after the physician had attended to the little girl and she was resting, Kwame invited the boy to join him for dinner. Kwame had been observing him throughout the day, noting how fiercely protective he was of his sister. The boy wasn't very big, yet his spirit was strong and unyielding. Kwame couldn't help but feel a pull toward him, a connection he didn't fully understand. The boy had stayed close to the physician's door, peeking through the curtains to ensure his sister wasn't being harmed. He repeatedly asked Kwame if the physician could be trusted. Life had clearly hardened him, making him suspicious of every act of kindness. If Kwame offered him a glass of water, the boy would question what was in it, why it was being offered, and what Kwame wanted in return. Even simple gestures like asking him to sit down while the physician tended to his sister were met with wary questions. Kwame was intrigued by the boy. He hadn't anticipated his day going this way. When Adebayo had left that morning, Kwame expected to wander the palace halls alone, lost in his thoughts and missing his husband. Lumusi, who might have kept him company, had returned to Ghana a few days earlier to attend to business. In a way, the boy and his sister's presence was a welcome distraction. It took a lot of effort for Kwame to convince the boy to join him for dinner. There's too much for me to eat alone, and I could use the company. Your sister is resting, and the physician left instructions not to disturb her, Kwame explained, responding to the boy's relentless questions. By now, Kwame was even growing fond of the boy's endless inquiries. From what Kwame had gathered from the boy's brief responses, both of their parents were no longer living, leaving the siblings to fend for themselves. Kwame could hardly imagine how difficult it must have been for the boy at such a young age to take on so much responsibility. The boy's eyes grew wide with excitement when Kwame took him to the dining hall, where piles of food were spread across the table, though he tried to hide his excitement because pride was important to him. After a while, as they ate, the boy suddenly asked Kwame, "So you're just going to stay here and let your husband solve all your marital problems alone?" Kwame looked at the boy, surprised and confused. W continued, "Don't act surprised. Everyone knows about the summon from the Union of West African Kings and that the king left this morning to present himself before them. News travels fast around here." Kwame stared at W, taken aback by the maturity in his tone. There was something about the boy that seemed older than his years. "If I were you," W went on, "I'd go with him so he doesn't feel alone." Kwame, still surprised, responded, "It's not that simple. You're too young to understand." With his mouth full, W shrugged, unfazed. "It's not that difficult to understand. Your uncle is the king of Ghana, the most powerful member of the Union. If he were to support King Adebayo, he could convince the others to let this whole thing go. I've heard stories that you're his favorite, though I'm not sure if that's still true since people found out you're a man who loves other men." Kwame was stunned by the boy's insight. "How do you know all this?" he asked, truly taken aback by W's knowledge and logic. "I've told you," W replied, tearing into a piece of meat like a starving lion. He had devoured everything on the table, and Kwame wondered where all the food was going. "News travels fast, and I like to know things. It's how I've survived on the streets for so long. Information is key to everything." Kwame thought about W's words. They made more sense than he cared to admit. It was true that he had once been his uncle's favorite, But he hadn't spoken to the man since coming out. He knew his uncle was homophobic, just like his parents, which is why he hadn't even considered reaching out. But now, with W's suggestion, he couldn't stop thinking about it. He couldn't just stay here in the palace, driving himself mad with worry about what Adebayo was facing alone before the union. Adebayo had always carried most of their burdens. It was time Kwame did something to help. "We're leaving for Ghana tomorrow," Kwame announced, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. W looked up from his food, asking, "We?" "Yes, we," Kwame replied, smiling. "You're the one who suggested the idea, so you'll help me execute it since you're so smart and know everything." W shook his head, immediately rejecting the idea. "I'm not going anywhere with you. I can't leave my sister's side. She needs me." Kwame's smile faded slightly, but he understood the boy's hesitation. "Your sister is being well taken care of," he explained gently. "She'll be in and out of sleep for a week, maybe more, according to the physician. There's nothing you can do for her right now and will only be gone for a few days." Despite Kwame's efforts to convince him, W remained adamant, refusing to leave his sister. Kwame was disappointed but didn't push further, saying, "Okay." After a moment of silence, a thought occurred to Kwame, and he asked the boy, "A lot of people in this kingdom think the king and I shouldn't be together, but it doesn't seem like you think that way." W paused, looked up briefly and shrugged. "I don't have a problem with it." Then he went right back to devouring his food, as if the topic were of little consequence to him. Kwame watched him with a mixture of curiosity and admiration, warmth spreading through his chest at the boy's straightforward acceptance. He was truly a character, full of surprises. The next morning, just as Kwame's carriage was about to depart, W suddenly jumped in, clutching a small worn bag. He was no longer dressed in tattered clothes, but in something provided by the palace servants at Kwame's request. "I'm only coming because I don't want to owe you anything," W said, his tone firm. "You're helping my sister, so this is my way of paying you back. Bring me back as soon as possible. My sister will want to see me when she wakes up." Kwame nodded, smiling warmly. "It's a deal." And with that, the two of them left Nigeria for Ghana, where King Adebayo had gone to answer the summon from the Union of West African Kings. King Adebayo stood in the grand chamber of the Union of West African Kings, surrounded by the imposing figures of the other 6 rulers who formed the union. The room was majestic, with high ceilings adorned with intricate patterns, and the kings sat on elevated thrones in a perfect circle. Adebayo stood alone in the center. Despite his royal status, he felt like a child being scolded, a stark irony that amused him even in the gravity of the situation. He was a king, for God's sake, yet here he was, summoned like a misbehaving schoolboy. This was an attempt at humiliation, pure and simple. Since receiving the summon on his wedding day, Adebayo had been bombarded with advice from all sides. His mother, seasoned in the ways of court politics, his remaining council members, and even one of the kings seated here today, an old ally of his father, had weighed in. The consensus was clear. If he wanted to keep doing business with the union, he should recant the bill legalizing same-sex marriage. It wasn't the relationship with Kwame that troubled the union, they said, but the public acknowledgement of it. Adebayo was advised to revert Kwame to the status of a lover rather than a husband. "People will still grumble," they had said, "but no one will feel compelled to take action." These words played over in his mind as he stood before the union. He was fueled with rage at the hypocrisy surrounding him. Did these men honestly believe they had the moral high ground? Adebayo scanned the room, his gaze resting on each king. He thought of the rumors, the dark secrets that clung to some of them like shadows. All of them had a reputation for things far worse than Adebayo's supposed transgression. Yet here they sat in judgment of him. The rage simmered within Adebayo. Who were they to judge him? They were not perfect. They were guilty of far worse than loving another man. Their subjects were blissfully unaware of the horrors these men had wrought. Wars, exploitation, unspeakable abuses, yet no one summoned them to account for their sins. King Adebayo had let Kwame wonder about his decision for a reason. The truth was, Adebayo had made up his mind the moment he received that letter. There was never a question of who he would choose between his throne, his reputation, and Kwame. He cleared his throat, the room falling silent in anticipation. "Your Highnesses," Adebayo began, his voice calm but resolute, "I have given this matter deep consideration, and I stand by my decision to legalize same-sex marriage in my kingdom. This is not merely a legal issue, but a moral one. Love in all its forms is a fundamental human right. Whether it is between a man and a woman, or between two men or two women, love is not a threat to society. It is not something to be feared or suppressed. I refuse to live in hiding. I am King Adebayo, deeply in love and married to a beautiful man, and I plan to love him openly for as long as he will have me. No amount of gold in this world will make me change my mind." The chamber erupted in shock. A few of the kings gasped audibly, while others stared at Adebayo in disbelief. One of them leaned forward, his voice laced with warning. "Are you certain of your decision, King Adebayo? You must understand the consequences. You risk bankruptcy, disgrace, or worse." Adebayo smiled inwardly at their naivety. These men had no idea how much he loved Kwame. They saw the world through the lens of power and wealth. But to Adebayo, Kwame was worth more than all the gold in his treasury. He had considered all options, including abandoning his kingdom to live in exile with Kwame on a remote island. He had enough gold to last them a lifetime in obscurity, far removed from the pressures of court, and had even thought of ceding his throne to his power-hungry cousin, Olusegun, to make this dream a reality. But in the end, he had resolved that surrendering would mean backing down, and he was not going to be cowed by these bullies. Giving in now would set a dangerous precedent, emboldening them to make further demands. He had worked too hard to reach his position to let it be taken away by manipulation. His fight was not just for himself and Kwame, but for everyone who had ever been marginalized for their love. If he backed down, it would signal that even a king could be subjugated by homophobes. It was crucial to fight for his legacy and for every outcast who had ever been told they were less because of who they loved. Running would mean surrendering, and that was not who he was. Without another word, Adebayo signaled to his guards stationed by the door. They moved forward, each carrying an envelope, and handed one to each king except the king of Ghana. The late King Adebayo's father had always taught him that information was the most powerful weapon in this world, and today that lesson proved invaluable. After receiving the summon on his wedding day, Adebayo had devised a strategy to combat the union. Throughout his reign, he had meticulously collected information during every encounter and event, understanding that knowledge is freely given when others don't see you as a threat. He had delved into his archives and crafted letters for each king, detailing the secrets he had accumulated over the years, secrets they would never want exposed. The room was now charged with tension as Adebayo observed the kings reading their letters, their faces shifting from confusion to shock, discomfort, and finally fear. It was clear that they had underestimated him, and a silent acknowledgement of their miscalculation passed among them. The king of Ghana, the most influential among them and the only one who had not received a letter, surveyed the room with growing confusion. "What is happening?" he demanded, his voice slicing through the uneasy silence. The other kings avoided his gaze, refusing to disclose the contents of their letters. The king of Ghana pressed for answers, urging them to move forward with their decision to expel Adebayo. However, the other kings hesitated, their resolve visibly wavered by what they had just read. Only moments before, they had been set on severing ties with Adebayo, but now none of them seemed willing to proceed with the action. King Adebayo observed the shift with satisfaction. He knew that without the support of the king of Ghana, this victory was incomplete, but it was a start. The king of Ghana's inner circle was built like a fortress, and despite Adebayo's efforts, he had found nothing significant enough to use against him. Yet, what had transpired here today marked the beginning of something greater. As Adebayo turned to leave, he delivered a final provocative statement, his voice echoing through the chamber. "When you've made up your minds, you know where to find me. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a husband to return to." With that, he walked out, leaving behind a room filled with uncertainty and a particularly frustrated king of Ghana. The battle was not over, but Adebayo had made his stand. They had forgotten that he was one of them, well versed in their games. Kwame and W arrived in Accra late in the afternoon. As the carriage rolled into the familiar surroundings, Kwame's heart tugged at the thought of home. He missed it, the familiar sounds, the comforting smells, the echoes of his childhood. But the painful reality quickly reminded him that home was no longer a place where he was welcome. Perhaps, in the future, he might find a way to reconcile with his parents just as he had with Lumusi. For now, though, there were more pressing matters at hand. "Straight to the palace," Kwame instructed his entourage, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his heart. He knew his uncle would be there, and he needed to speak with him urgently. As the carriage pulled up to the grand entrance of the palace, Kwame took a deep breath before stepping out. The air was thick with tension, memories, and the weight of what lay ahead. Beside him, W noticed the shift in Kwame's demeanor. Hesitantly, W reached out, placing a hand on Kwame's shoulder. "It's going to be okay," he said softly, his voice laced with concern. Even in his own misery, Kwame was moved by the boy's sensitivity, a small flicker of warmth in the cold uncertainty that surrounded him. Inside the palace, the last thing Kwame expected was to be greeted by Lumusi. Her scream of delight pierced through the somber air, and before he knew it, she had flung herself into his arms. "What are you doing here?" Kwame asked, caught off guard by her presence. Lumusi, still clinging to him, laughed. "I should be the one asking you that. Uncle asked me to come over and help him with something. Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" Her excitement was contagious, and for a brief moment, the weight on Kwame's heart seemed to lift. He smiled, explaining that his decision to come had been spontaneous. Then, turning to W, he introduced him to Lumusi. As the siblings stood together, the servants who had been going about their duties paused, casting glances at Kwame, the disgraced Mensa twin, some surprised, some disgusted, others unreadable. But there was another emotion that Kwame couldn't quite place, something that made his skin prickle with unease. "Did you hear?" Lumusi's voice broke through his thoughts, bringing him back to the present. "Hear what?" Kwame asked, his tone now cautious. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I overheard Uncle and Father talking earlier. They were furious about what happened at the Union of West African Kings this morning. Apparently, your husband's meeting with the kings did not go as they had hoped. He told them all to go to hell and refused to recant the same-sex marriage act in his kingdom. "That's so bold, Kwams. You're the luckiest man in the world." Lumusi giggled like a child as she shared the story. Kwame's heart swelled with pride and love. Once again, Adebayo had chosen him over everything else, standing firm even against the might of other kings. A deep longing to return home to Adebayo gripped him. The sooner he spoke with his uncle, the sooner he could be back in the arms of the man he loved. Lumusi also confided to Kwame that she suspected it was their uncle's idea to cut King Adebayo off from the union, and with his considerable influence, the other kings had gone along with it. Kwame quickened his pace, eager to find his uncle and leave, but just as he stepped further into the house, a familiar figure appeared before him. Danso, the notorious young prince of Ghana, stood in his path. At just 16, Prince Danso carried himself with the arrogance of a boy who already saw himself as king. He was the kind of prince who didn't need to speak his mind to make his presence felt. His very stance, the haughty tilt of his chin, the coldness in his eyes, all spoke volumes. He was his father's son, and he knew it. "Cousin," Kwame greeted. "Cousin," Prince Danso echoed, his voice dripping with condescension. There had always been a bond between them. Neither had brothers, so they had grown up considering each other as such. Kwame had been like an older brother to Prince Danso, their relationship strong, until Kwame had left for Nigeria and never returned. Fear had held Kwame back from reaching out, unsure of where Prince Danso would stand on the matter of his love for Adebayo. And now, standing before him, Kwame thought maybe he had been right not to reach out. Homophobia was rampant in his family, and who had he been kidding to hope Danso would be any different? "You finally decided to show your face," Prince Danso said, his words sharp, almost like a snare. Kwame noticed the change immediately. The boy who once looked up to him now regarded him with a coldness that made Kwame's heart ache. The once familiar warmth was gone, replaced by something disapproving. Danso had always been mean and aloof with others, but never with him until now. The look in Prince Danso's eyes wasn't just disappointment. It was a challenge, a silent declaration that he too had taken a side, and that side was not Kwame's. The tension between them was dense, each standing their ground, unsaid words hanging heavy in the air. As Kwame made to move past him, Prince Danso shifted ever so slightly, blocking his path. The silent defiance in his stance was clear, the hate that now shone brightly in his eyes. He wasn't going to let Kwame pass easily. Their standoff was brief but charged, and Kwame knew that whatever bond they once shared had been tainted forever. Prince Danso's gaze suddenly shifted to W, who had been standing quietly behind Kwame, taking in the exchange. "What is that thing behind you?" Prince Danso sneered, his voice laced with disgust. He seemed to have forgotten about whatever had been about to happen between himself and Kwame, and was now solely focused only on W, the look on his face that of someone who had just stepped on something vile. W stiffened, his eyes narrowing as Prince Danso pointed at him. "Who let a street rat into the palace? Where did that thing come from?" Kwame's anger flared. He stepped forward, grabbing Danso's arm. "Knock it off," he hissed. "He's not a thing, he's a person. Don't talk about him like that." Prince Danso slapped Kwame's hand away, his eyes blazing with contempt. "Don't touch me," he spat. "You're disgusting, Kwame. Don't touch me with the same hands you use to touch that filthy King Adebayo you disgracefully married. I cannot believe you let a man lay with you. I cannot believe you let another man touch you like a man touches a woman. Tell me, does he mount you or do you mount him? Who is the wife? And who is the husband? You're disgusting, and I feel like vomiting just by looking at you." The words were a knife to Kwame's heart. He had expected hostility, but not from Prince Danso, not from the boy he had loved like a brother. Before Kwame could respond, Prince Danso stormed off, his anger leaving a trail of bitterness in the air. But W wasn't about to let it go. He had been called many things in his life: beggar, thief, useless, but never a thing. And he wasn't going to let Prince Danso's words slide. "I'm not a thing," W shouted after him, his voice trembling with fury. "I am a person and I have a name, you arrogant prick. And also, there is no wife or husband in a marriage between two men. It's just two men married to each other." Gasps echoed through the hall as the servants took in W's audacity. The prince was feared, and no one ever spoke back to him. If you did, there were consequences. But W didn't care. In that moment, all he wanted was to wipe that arrogant smirk off the prince's face and wash his filthy mouth with soap. In fact, if they were out on the streets right now and Prince Danso didn't have his royal status to hide behind, W was certain he'd teach him a lesson he'd never forget. Prince Danso stopped in his tracks, turning slowly to face W. His expression was a mix of surprise and disdain, as if he couldn't believe that someone like W had dared to speak back to him. All his life, no one had ever dared speak back or question him, especially not some pauper, because it seemed to him that the boy was of a lower class based on his unpolished look. Prince Danso's lip curled in a sneer as he looked W up and down, as though assessing his worth. "Someone get that thing out of my palace," Prince Danso ordered, blocking his nose dramatically as if W's very presence made the air stink. How did it even get in here? And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving W seething with rage. W's fists clenched at his sides as he watched Prince Danso disappear down the corridor. How dare he? The fury in W's chest burned hot and fierce. He wanted to chase after Prince Danso to make him regret every word. But Kwame's gentle touch on his back pulled him back from the edge. "I am sorry," Kwame whispered, his voice thick with regret. "He's not in a good mood today." W shook his head, still fuming. "Who does he think he is?" he muttered. "One day I'll make him pay for this, I swear. And he called you disgusting. And you just stood there and took it. You should have punched him in the face." Kwame's heart ached at W's words. The pain of Danso's rejection cut deep, deeper than he had expected. He had braced himself for his parents' disappointment. But Danso's? That had been a blow he wasn't prepared for. He squeezed W's hand in silent apology,